I had a bunch of cards fall out that stack, and the only one that made it to the floor was the Ace of Pentacles, which auspicious start, but I don't know, I'm kind of ready to like drag a bitch, so I want to know what's going on in Mr. Sean's energy. Lovers. I don't know why I'm like mad about that. I'm sorry. Just be like supportive here. Uh, well, like I guess it is a matter of like I want to support you, and if he's gonna be a motherfucking bitch to you, then I don't support him as a human. That's like a mean thing to say. That's a really mean thing to say. Maybe I shouldn't have picked the weed pen so many times. Um, anyways, let's start with this. And then we're gonna keep digging until we figure out what the fuck this dude's up and doing. So we have the Lovers, the King of Wands, the Six of Swords, the Empress, the Five of Cups, and the Page of Cups. So, I mean, like, the overall theme here is that there is a lot of desire to release the past, desire to overcome the challenges presented by the past with the Six of Swords and the King of Wands here. There's like this energy of almost like this is kind of like the, I don't even want to say like ideal that he's trying to project, because it almost feels like that's the situation he's looking for, or where he feels he's at, or who he could mirror is someone who understands their past, understands the associated baggage, and has the desire to move past that. And more specifically, with this like Empress, Five of Cups, I said Page of Cups before, but that is the Page of Wands. You know, that it doesn't like fully change the interpretation, but you know, it kind of does, because we also have the King of Wands over here where we're talking about growth and releasing baggage and evolution. And so like we can literally see this Page of Wands grow into this King of Wands, related to this loss or this grief associated with like feminine energy. Um, and specifically that may be related to a state of being comparatively immature, because we have a page here and an empress here. And it's like if a page, you know, tries to approach an empress, it ends poorly. And there's almost like this sense of working to configure like his perspective of himself from the page who fumbled the empress to, you know, the king that can bag a lover. You know, it's like this process, this journey that feels very reflective of, you know, his personal journey, I think, to show up in a more fully embodied and empowered masculine state. Just want to know, how's Mr. Sean O'Neill actually doing with that? Like, is he doing that? Because I don't want to hear some I intend to. I want to know what the fuck is going on. Four of Cups. Nine of Swords in reverse. Page of Swords. Temperance. Well, I hate to give a man credit for anything, but this does seem like someone who is making an effort. Disappointing, I know. But there is the sense with the Four of Cups of kind of like disconnecting from a lot of the things that I think were causing issues before. And this sense of almost like being able to work through certain anxieties related to communication that he wasn't able to before. I think that like before it was like this sense of disconnect, but it was more like this Nine of Swords upright, where it was like the kind of anxieties that keep you up all night, the kind of things that feel too impenetrable to talk about. But with Temperance and the Page of Swords, there's like this new rebirth of communication that kind of turns this anxiety that existed before on its head. It's almost like the energy of someone who is afraid that, oh my God, like what if I get really bored in this connection and then I end up doing something stupid? And, the obvious logical answer to that is like, why don't you just communicate the disconnect, and partner with someone who has the capacity to balance you out and actually meet those needs and alleviate those anxieties before they get to the point of causing disconnect and poor decisions. And it's like it feels like, to me it's like, well, that's like the bare minimum, the basics. But I guess that's why we have like the Page of Swords here, where there's something about getting it through his head, what it would actually take to create a balanced situation. And in this version of Temperance, it's interesting because we don't have the typical picture of like the angelic figure that's like pouring one cup into the other. We have two snakes. And, the name of the card in this deck is just balance as opposed to temperance, really focusing on that aspect of harmony and reciprocation. And this does seem to be like someone who enjoys like communication and someone who enjoys like mental connection with a partner and struggles to feel connected to someone, who's maybe not wanting to have interesting conversations or keep that energy moving. And I think that there is a sense specifically with you of being very different than situations this person has been in the past. Like, very much, I didn't know that people could show up that way kind of vibe is like what I'm hearing. That I think is like reconfiguring this sense of what happened was inevitable from what happened was the result of me not being with the kind of person that I wanted to be. I don't know why I'm saying that in first person. Am I channeling this motherfucker? Gross. I want another man inside me right now. I mean, like, I want a man inside me, but not that man. Okay. So I want to know, what's this motherfucker hiding? What's he not saying? Like, give me some dirt. He's fucking dirt. The sun! Fuck it. I don't get paid enough for this shit. Knight of Pentacles. Five of Wands. We got the big dick energy card. I don't know if you can see it, but this is the card that I was like, I have to censor it if I show it on camera because he's got a wiener there. I just thought you'd appreciate that. Pretty. You're gonna make me say this. I'm not saying this for him. I'm saying this for her. With the Sun, the Knight of Pentacles, the Five of Wands, and the Four of Wands, there is this sense of... So, I guess now I have to explain the Big Dick Energy card. In this particular deck, the depiction of the Five of Wands, which typically refers to conflict, jealousy, energies that are somewhat, just generally not in alignment. Like there's a push and pull, there's a conflict, there's difficulty to that. In this, the suit of wands is represented by bows. So we see 4 bows that are placed down here, and the 5th bow is represented by like this image that is carved into the side of the hill here that kind of represents this idea of, yes, there was a conflict, but the way that the conflict was resolved was by, sort of understanding, creating this, shared image or vision here, which is why the keyword for this card, rather than being conflict or jealousy or whatever else, is empowerment, and this idea of coming together as a collective empowerment, and drawing a dick on the side of a mountain, I guess. This is the second time that I've had to explain the specifics of that card because that came out in the fucking reading I did for that dude I was talking to you about. And I had to explain why the penis card was significant, which, is a great thing to do when you're in that situation and being very professional about it. I'm only a semi-professional psychic, I'll have you know. Point being, this feels like, I think deep down, this is a person who knows what he wants. This also feels like a person who understands that what he wants in a relationship is something that is hard to come by, is something that you typically have to put a lot of work into, is something that, is very special. And so there is this sense of willingness to be patient and get himself to the point where he feels as though he is at an equivalent level as the person or energies that he would want. But there's also this sense of not being closed off to that now. It's almost like the energy of someone who's like, well, I'd really like a new car, but I only have $2,000 in the bank. So if the new car that I want, and I know what kind of car that I need in order to meet my needs, is $10,000, I'm just going to keep saving until I have $10,000. However, if someone comes along and offers me that car for $2,000, sure, I'm going to take it to a mechanic, have him look over it, make sure that I'm not getting fucked over here, but I'm not going to say no to that. Kind of a vibe, which I don't know how I feel about that. I want to know how he's seeing you specifically. The Hermit. 5 of Swords. This was the card that we talked about a lot in relation to both you and I, when we first met. So we've got the Hermit, the 5 of Swords, the Moon, and the Ace of Wands. I think he sees you as someone who has a lot of internal resolve. There is this sense of you committing to what it is that matters to you at whatever cost. And there's this sense of sometimes I think he doesn't fully understand with the moon here. Just initially, especially, I think why you made the choices that you did. But I think that with this Ace of Wands, there's something here about the more that kind of that energy, that spark is exchanged or, realized, there is this sense of almost illumination. It's this Ace of Wands is the spark that lights up the little lantern thing that the hermit dude is carrying there. And kind of cuts through the fog, cuts through that moonlight, and I think that there is this sense of especially with the Ace of Wands, being like attracted to that. Being attracted to the fact that like you're someone who would rather be alone than with the wrong person, because I think for a long time in his life he was not that. And he was someone who would rather be with the wrong person or be in a less than ideal situation than step out on his own. And I think that there's something that like he admires and finds attractive about that. Um, at the same time, it's almost like a little bit intimidating. But there's more like, I guess, attraction, admiration there than anything. That I think is not always visible to you as well with the moon there. But I think that it becomes more visible, harder for him to hide as that plays into like his attraction to you. What else about this motherfucker? Ooh, we got the Seven of Swords. That's the lying card. So let's see what he's lying about. I mean, technically in this deck, it's represented as insecurity and the idea of like mental illusions casting shadows across our choices, but you know, whatever. Two of Wands, Eight of Wands, Ace of Swords. I think that like there's some anxiety in his mind about moving forward, you know, and may not have even been fully honest with you that, you know, he's given thought to and even made like an internal decision that were it to be accepted and that energy reciprocated, he would want to move forward with you. With this Two of Wands, Two of Bows decision, and then, you know, Hearthfire, Eight of Wands, energy moving, an Ace of Swords, Breath of Life. There's some kind of clarity that he came to. There's a lot of energy here that feels like refreshed, and especially like by your presence, because once I started reading for the way that he sees you is when I had this like Ace of Wands and like Ace of Swords come out. And I think that there's a sense of, especially with like the Eight of Wands, the Ace of Swords, and the insecurity card here, something about like wanting to offer you the truth in spite of his insecurities. And I think that initially there was this sense of those insecurities making it harder to see like the path or energy that he wanted. But there was something about that spark in communication that I think pushed through that. You know, I like in the Seven of Swords or arrows in this deck, insecurity, you see there's like this, literally like this woman who's like being pierced by a bunch of swords, arrows. And then we have, you know, the Ace of Arrows over here, and it's kind of like something that you said, like, cut through the insecurity, the illusion, the desire to, like, maintain that. And there's something about, like, a desire, like, regardless of where this goes, to be like, you know what, I'm gonna give her the best. There's Eight of Pentacles on the bottom, too. It's like, you know what, I'm just gonna show up. I'm just gonna show up, whatever happens, happens. Doesn't feel like a lot of like expectation here, like someone who would be angry if you turned them down. This feels like someone who would be like, yeah, I get it. But also someone who finds that you, I don't want to say like sets him off balance in a bad way, but I think that there's like the person that maybe he expected you to be when he first saw your face versus the person that you are is different in a good way. You know, I think that you're like a lot more real, a lot more different, a lot more refreshing, a lot more honest. And I think that makes like him want to embody more of those traits. So I want to know, what advice that Spirit has for Nicole. Now, we've kind of nosed around in this motherfucker's vibe for a while. Where might this be going? What's going on? Oh, good. We got the Hierophant, the Ancestor. The Seven of Pentacles, healing. High Priestess, the Knight of Swords. Devil. Justice. Well, I want to end on Justice because that's the Libra card and that's your card. I always think about when I see that. So we'll just look at these, see what they have to say, and go from there. So the Ancestor, Seven of Pentacles, the High Priestess, Knight of Swords, there's kind of like this sense of, you know the path that you're on. You know what it is that you want. And you have an intuitive sense of like what feels healing and what doesn't. What allows you to process and release and grow as a person, make actual changes in your life, communicate freely, and what doesn't. And, you know, there's almost this sense of like they don't even want me to, you know, try to push too far into the future of this and look at like, oh, what would he do? What, you know, because like with the High Priestess here, like there is this sense of healing through trusting your own intuitive knowing. And I really like that there's like both the Hierophant and the High Priestess here, because those are the masculine and feminine, you know, sort of two halves, two sides of the same coin, embodiments of like spiritual teachers, spiritual leaders, and, you know, tells me that there's a lot of spiritual guidance that is intended to pull this in a direction that is healing. That is healing in some capacity, that allows for movement and growth. And I really kind of like this combination of like the devil and then justice. It's like this time the devil faced justice. This time, the energy was dealt with in the way that it needed to be. You know, like there's this sense of rebalancing, you know, with an acknowledgement that that rebalancing was needed because something was in the way. Something was out of balance. But this feels like a very powerful and like intuitively guided kind of way to wrap this up, as far as it's like, you've got it, the team's got it, I've got it. This motherfucker is never going to be allowed to do anything that will not be actively contributing to your healing. And there's this sense of heavy protectiveness over the individuals present, and this sense of wanting you to feel safe to engage in whatever way feels the most authentic to you. And there's almost like this sense of you know very strongly like what your morals are, and like what is right and wrong, and what you can or can't forgive, and why you can or can't forgive that. And there's this sense of like, you know, you kind of blow holes in anyone's excuses if they try to make them. And it's like, don't be afraid to call shit out when you see it. Because the way that people react to that, like, tells you a lot more than almost anything else that, like, you could ask of them in those instances. And I think that like someone who is on the same path as you and someone who is intended to be with you is someone who, when those like blind spots or those wounds are pointed out, says like, how do I heal them? How do I handle this? What changes do I need to make? Because I think there's always going to be adjustments. There's always going to be changes, but it shouldn't be a situation in which you have to provide the motivation for that. Even if sometimes you point out things that other people who aren't as smart as you are not inclined to see on their own, you shouldn't have to convince anyone to want to do better. You shouldn't have to convince anyone to do the right thing. That's not your job. That's not your responsibility. You're just here to, kind of be the person that you are. Be supported in that, and the way that you naturally exist kind of calls out those shadows, that devil, so to speak, that people use to kind of guard the insecurities or illusions that they feed themselves. And I'm hearing like the path is set, the table is set. I don't really know what that means. They're getting really quiet now, which is usually the signal that they're done talking. I feel like I've not said anything helpful. I've just been yapping. But I guess if they tell me to shut the fuck up, then we'll shut the fuck up. We have judgment, which is the great bear on the bottom. So hopefully there's something here that is at least somewhat pertinent or partially relevant to the situation that you're in, or at least was mildly entertaining. So, yeah, let me know what I can expand on, and I'll do my best.